Hello listeners, Bella Malloy here, host of Seek Travel Ride. Welcome to another midweek mini episode where I am stoking your fire for travel adventures. Now this week I am featuring a story from Tom Cartledge, who along with his mate Rhys back in 2013 took a huge adventure from England to India. Today Tom is going to be transporting us back to a very memorable time spent in Georgia. Tom is a fantastic storyteller, so I have no doubt you are going to enjoy listening to him talk about the experiences of what must have been quite a wild journey. Take it away, Tom.
Hi Bella, hi Seek Travel Ride listeners. I'm Tom Cartledge, one half of Saddle Sore from England to India, a book about a cycle ride which I did back in 2013, where I set off with one of my best friends, Rhys, to cycle on our bikes from Harrogate in Yorkshire to New Delhi, basically, in India. We had no plan of how we were really going to get there, no idea of an exact route, right? We had a rough route, no idea really what we were doing, a couple of sponsors, and just in general, we were two mates and a vague sense of which direction east was. The total trip was around 17 countries, thousands and thousands of kilometers, as you can imagine. And it included countless mistakes. We even quote Google at the time as being known as Google Adventures, because the version of the maps that we were using kept taking us off route into forests covered with snow, into desertous regions, into, basically dead ends, or shortcuts, which I say in those inverted commas. Yeah, the real story wasn't really about the distance, and the aim wasn't, I suppose, just to get to India. It was really about connecting with the space in between A and B. I think I'd grown up as a young child, always taking flights and looking out the window and wondering what was down there. Then getting a little bit older and after school, not moving straight onto university, wanting and actually been told by my parents to go travelling. But yet still travelling on planes, trains, occasionally by vehicle, and still missing those epic moments in between, right? You see an amazing beach, which you just love to stop at, but you can't because the train's not stopping there, etc. The point of traveling by bicycle was to really get into that viscous sense of what a country really is, not just its major cities, its secondary cities, and its bigger towns. Really wanted to kind of get into village life and even staying camping in the middle of absolutely nowhere, just enjoying those. The country that I want to focus on here, though, that really changed everything for me would be Georgia. Leading up to getting to Georgia, we left England in 2013, very early in the year, just as spring was almost on the horizon. We cycled from Harrogate down to Hull, where we took a ferry. That was probably one of the most dangerous parts of the whole trip. We were trying to gauge the weight of the bicycle. Rhys had really not done any cycling before since he was a child and had bought his bicycle from Halfords. Not really much preparation, to be honest. We spent more time focusing on a website and a good name, Saddle Sore, and then finding links for charities than we had actually doing much practice. We just thought that'll be on the road, that we'll do that on the way. However, on the way down to Hull, we ended up cycling down what I think we're told was allowed. At least Google said it was okay to cycle down a 3-lane highway. As you can imagine, we had knuckles that looked like diamonds. It was ridiculous. Anyway, after that incredible day one of the experience, we arrived in the Netherlands, cycled up to Amsterdam, cycled north, in our first camping experience actually on the German border. It was incredibly snowy, incredibly cold, and that was when we realised that we actually hadn't brought any ground mats. So, as you can imagine, we were absolutely freezing in March, sleeping in a bramble bush, not even able to get our cigarette lighters to start the gas stove so that we could make some tea. So it was a horrible start to the journey. For the whole trip across the north of Germany, that's pretty much what we had. To cut the rest of the European story kind of like short in a kind of Devlin Murphy fashion, we ended up then cycling all the way down into northern Greece, then crossed into Turkey. Turkey is insanely beautiful and its people were incredible. I had no strata, I think, to compare it to anything before that, but it suddenly shot up the list into one of the best countries I've ever visited. One of the other countries I think that could have made it on this list would have been Armenia. We cycled through Armenia after leaving Georgia on the way down to Iran. Iran was absolutely spectacular, and again, could have been one of the focuses of this podcast just because of everything that turned upside down for us, to be honest. Like, we feared ourselves and we feared everything. Maybe not feared, but had a heavy anticipation, right? From all the mediation, everything which had gone in front of our eyes as youth. However, as soon as we arrived, we probably received hundreds of handshakes in a row just welcoming us to that country. Everywhere we went, people would stop cars, provide food, invite us into their homes. It was next level insane when it comes to hospitality. Like, it was incredible. What I wanted to focus on today, though, was Georgia. At the time, it was a country that I knew little about. I think I knew Stalin had come from there, Joseph Jugashvili, of course. That was about it. So we arrived from Turkey, battered, really, from the north coast, sunburnt. I've got Irish DNA, so I've got very pasty skin that often is burnt under a full moon. And at that time, I was kind of like living on strong crimson tea and budget baklava to get us through the days, just camping in the most amazing points. But I remember quite vividly crossing the border towards Batumi, which is one of the third biggest cities in Georgia, and just being hit by this smell. I can almost remember it vividly, which is strange for a busy kind of border crossing. It smelled like a kind of a candy shop, like a sweet shop, right? It was full of activity, people going across from Turkey into Georgia and vice versa with things on their backs that they're just looking like human camels. It was incredible, but this sweet, sweet smell and this incredible border building, which looked like it was out of a sci-fi novel. It was, just a different world. And as we cycled eventually into the city of Batumi from the border, there seemed to be a lot of like eucalyptus trees around and beautiful tarmac, and kind of conjured up images of what I remembered from traveling in Australia. It had that kind of, that warmth, that almost like cultural similarity to the countryside there. But that all changed as soon as we got into the third biggest city, Batumi, which was, like nothing I'd ever expected. I had no idea, but suddenly what rose out of the horizon was a futuristic city, massive skyscrapers, insane. And then as we're then trying to find accommodation, we're walking down these cobbled streets, which could be reminiscent of France. There was just this duality of breaking down of expectations, or maybe of just not really having any expectations and not knowing what we were going to really walk ourselves into. On the first night, we meet an American who has a massive patch on the back of his head because he'd been hit by a minibus, as they call them in Georgia and that part of the world, marshutkas, when he'd fallen out of a bar drunk and he'd been clipped by one of these things. He was quite a character. And he took us to dinner. He spoke pretty good Georgian and he introduced us to khachapuri and khinkali. So khachapuri being basically like the distant cousin to the pizza before the tomato was cultivated, and khinkali being like this incredible, probably the world's best dumplings, like absolutely insane. And we just feasted on that and had way too much vodka, which is prevalent in Georgia, literally sitting down on the table and ordering a vase of vodka to the table with your food is normal, right? But otherwise it's known for an incredible wine. So we set off with this trip into Georgia quite romantically. We moved north because we were heading towards a country which doesn't exist, kind of hard to maybe do so, but a country called Abkhazia. So basically in the northwest of Georgia, tucked in with the Russian border. Now, Georgians probably call this just an area breakaway of Georgia, as there was a lot of Georgians moved out forcibly during the wars with Russia in the 90s. We wanted to go there, I think, to see the other side of the coin. We'd never heard of one of these places. There were some ghost towns there, and maybe it was a bit of a guilty thing, really, because looking back on it, maybe it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but we headed up that coastline through these incredible, beautiful fallow fields. Everywhere we went, a bit like Turkey, people wanted to stop us and invite us in for drinks. However, the drinks were not tea, the drinks were not coffee, the drinks were wine and beer and vodka at 10 a.m. And that was pretty hard to get movement going. But as we headed further north into the Caucasian mountains, which just loomed like a tsunami, basically of rock, coming down over lower Georgia. We crept up this hill up to this city called Poti. At first, we were almost forcibly followed by the police there to make sure we were safe, apparently. We quickly left that town as we didn't really feel safe being guided by them. Slept in some beautiful fields and eventually made our way north to a city called Zugdidi, which there's not really... Well, this is more like a kind of Romeo and Juliet story, I suppose. Like, we arrived there, we were talking about heading up into Abkhazia, just amongst ourselves in an eatery. We'd left the bikes outside. We were quite used to seeing old men just fiddling around with the tyres and fiddling around with the brakes, just being curious. And then we left the eatery after getting a lot of strange kind of looks from the locals, right? We mentioned this word Abkhazia a few times. And then as we go outside, we need to leave some of our rubbish, which we've got on our bikes. We put it in a dustbin, which is in this parkway, which is floating like an island almost in the middle of this inner city kind of highway, which is not a highway, just a boulevard, very wide, 3 lanes wide, that run around this elliptical kind of park. And then as we're trying to get back from that and we're having a cigarette, we noticed this guy paying far too much attention to the bikes, and what we thought we saw in his hand was a blade in that kind of Crocodile Dundee fashion, right? It's not just a toothpick, it was something that you could fight off a dinosaur with. Like, it looked from that distance, at least across 3 lanes of busiest traffic, like a 40-centimetre machete. Anywho, we were impeded from really crossing the traffic at that point and finding out what was going on because it was a red light for pedestrians. So kind of held in sprinter's limbo at that moment.
Listeners, I recently had the pleasure of taking my own little mini bikepacking adventure, and on that trip I used the Zerali Summit Seeker tent. Zerali are an Australian brand making awesome outdoor gear, and their prime motivation is to get more and more of us out there in the outdoors. So their gear is great value without a super high price tag. Their Summit Seeker tent, it's a 2-person tent and weighs just 1.6 kilos. What I absolutely loved about using it on this weekend was how quick and easy it was to pitch, the fact I could sit upright in it and not have my head hit the ceiling. It fit both me and my husband in it perfectly fine, and it has double doors, which meant neither of us had to awkwardly climb over each other if we needed a middle-of-the-night bathroom break. Check it out for yourselves, the Summit Seeker 2-person tent from Zerali. Clicking the affiliate link in the show notes also helps support this podcast. Back to the episode.
Not been able to get back across, and as we were able to get across, the guy's disappeared, and we see him running around a corner, and Rhys is left there trying to shout for the police. Nobody really understands English in that Kartvelian Georgian language, totally different. So Rhys is left there. I run after this guy, not even thinking about the blade, and run down this road around this corner, right? And there is literally no sign of the guy. And I'm checking under cars, I'm checking around corners in alleyways. And then eventually I come across this building that has a European Union flag flying outside of it, and I can't see this guy. So I run inside and just shout, "Police, police, we need the police." And I'm just dressed in tight cycling kind of clothes. Beautiful image. Eventually, the Georgian A-team arrives. We're sat on the steps having a smoke outside, and there's a congregation of people just gathered around us that have seen the commotion, and these guys eventually, they find something. They've sent off the cops in the area, and they find a bag, and it's presented to us on these steps. And when we open the deflated bag, which should have electronics in there, water purification kits, don't know why we took that, passports, both of them in the same bag, dumbass move for some reason, and lots of other things. The bag looked too deflated, and as we opened it, basically there was just that mean rusted machete just staring back at us with its absolute filthy middle eye. Yeah, definitely not what we'd packed. The crowd looked a bit shocked. We were definitely shocked because of the what if, right? What if we'd caught him? That could have not just been like trip over, but absolute game over. So the Georgian police didn't speak a word of English. They popped our bikes, tied them up and put them in the back of the 4x4, swung us off to the police compound, which was armed guarded 24 hours a day because of its close proximity to Abkhazia. And I mean, these guys weren't just carrying pistols, they were carrying like AK-47s and all this kind of stuff, right? Anywho, it takes ages for the police to be able to find an English translator. An English teacher comes and helps us, and we get the choice. You can go and sleep tonight in a local kind of bedsit with run by an Oma and an Opa, a grandma and a granddad, or you can camp by the fountain on the police compound. And I think of all of the camping places we had, this was not the most beautiful by any means, but it was definitely the most secure. It was definitely one of the edgiest places that we camped, and we stayed there for a couple of nights until the police found everything except for Rhys's belt. That's literally it. They found passports, they found the whole lot, and it was absolutely incredible. We needed to get new passports, though, I did, because of the water damage that had taken place when the filthy thief had tried to get rid of them. Anyhow, after all of this beautiful time that we'd spent up in Zugdidi, I mean, literally every restaurant we wanted to go to, we were chaperoned with a guy with a shotgun who would sit outside on the walls. Any place we wanted to go and buy just some snacks or some cigarettes or get some new shoes, we were chaperoned by a guy who didn't want to be our chaperone with a shotgun. It was incredible, like bizarre, topsy-turvy. So this was like an introduction really to Georgia. After that, we moved down into Tbilisi, the big city, the big lights, the big cheese. And what a place. Like, I'd made contact with a girl through couchsurfing called Khatia, and Khatia is still a friend of mine, like a really good friend. We still message via WhatsApp probably once a month or so. She now lives in Italy, and yeah, she introduced us to a whole friendship group. They would take us to places that we would never have found. I think the fact that we were meeting them on a regular cadence throughout the week, they really became friends. It was incredible. So we're surrounded by all of these mountains, this lush Georgian kind of greenery in the summer, and this incredible heat, and just this beautiful level of friendship. What Georgia summed up was chaos, was heart, was generosity wrapped up in a bottle of cha-cha, really. They have a statue, Mother Georgia, which stands over Tbilisi, and she has a blade, a sword in one hand, and she has a bowl in her other hand. And basically we were told that this means you come to our country with the utmost hospitality and we will always give you the bowl of food first, but if you messes around, then this is the ferocity that's coming on this side. There was this buzzing feeling in the city. It stole from us, it fed us, it fixed us, actually. I think the journey really got real, right? It stopped just being this kind of beautiful trip, something that possibly had an end, and it impacted something that will last for the rest of my life. The warmth of people, how they treat you. Like that was a reflection on my own community, on my own way of life, and how I may look at treating people in the future and in the present. The road will break you open, but strangers, I think, will hand it back to you in pieces with tea and laughter and build you back up, even in a language that you don't understand. Yeah, it's a crazy place and it's a beautiful thing. Maybe just to give you a bit at the end here, that Rhys was not a cyclist at all. He smoked 40 cigarettes a day before we set off. We both carried on smoking throughout the journey. We weren't pushing 200 kilometers a day. We definitely became fit, but we really enjoyed the trip because cycling gave us that gift, really, I suppose, of getting out into the countryside, getting out into those small communities that we would never have really had access to because we wouldn't have known to get off the bus there, or we wouldn't have even known to take a bus in those areas. And if you're thinking of doing something like this trip, Rhys is a great poster boy, right? That you don't have to be super fit. You don't have to be a BBC adventurer. You don't have to have the budget. You don't have to have the university degree. Like, travel is out there for you to go and find, and it shouldn't have to be this glitzy, glamoury Instagram poster. You should go out there and find it. The madder, the better, to be honest. You shouldn't have to fear the breakdowns and the detours because that's what makes it real. Ultimately, thank you, Bella, and thank you, listeners, for listening to me ramble on about my travel from back in 2013. I've turned this into a book now, which can be found on any Amazon near you. And yeah, hope you enjoyed that story. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Tom. Oh, I really enjoyed listening back to you tell your story there, and also just thinking what a wild trip both you and Rhys had. quite a laugh out loud moment listening to you talk about Google Adventures and where Google Maps was taking you back in 2013. My mind only boggles, but I feel like every single bike adventurer out there can relate to this story because all of us have been sent down a myriad of places where you've gone, what on earth? I know I have. I've had moments where I've gone down areas where all of a sudden I'm meant to ride down 2 sets of stairs or cross a river onto a set of train tracks, or I've been riding through Paris and been directed on a ring road near the Périphérique. So it happens to all of us, sometimes can lead to a sense of humour failure, but I'm sure you and Rhys took it all in your stride. And then I love the idea that what you were really after there was learning about the spaces in between. It actually takes me right back to an interview I did with a fantastic guest, David McCourt, listeners. You know how I finish every long episode with a question of the best thing about taking a bike adventure is? David was the first person to respond to that with, it's the spaces in between. And it's about the magic that happens between the places that we already know about. So going to places that you've never heard about, that don't exist on a map, having these wild interactions. I love that was your motivation there, Tom, to seek out. It sounded like Georgia was quite a wild experience. You got me into the story there, obviously talking about khachapuri, beautiful food. Oh my gosh, I love featuring food on the podcast. And I haven't had khachapuri yet myself, but I've spoken to many, many travellers who have. And it's high up on my list of things to try. But also the hospitality of the people there, and then the wildness of your bike being stolen, everything being taken away, getting there, not having your passports and all of that critical stuff, but then spending the time with the police, and then somehow, weirdly, it all magics itself back into existence for you and they find it. To then the other side of the coin, you know, out of this crazy thing that could have been quite a downer, you made all these long-lasting friendships, spent quite a good time in Georgia, and now you reflect back on that as part of the highlights of your trip. I also really loved hearing about Rhys and you there and reaffirming that idea that you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to have superhuman fitness. You just need to have the idea and the belief that you can just start and work it out on the way. And that sounds like what you and Rhys did. So, listeners, if you're out there sort of holding yourself back from taking a bike adventure, and whether that's a bike adventure that's going to see you just taking an overnighter somewhere on the weekend, going away for a month or maybe for a year, it doesn't really matter. Don't hold yourself back with the idea that you don't have what you need. I have interviewed so many people, just like Tom and his mate Rhys there, who have taken amazing journeys, and taking off on day one may as well have been the first time they have ever done so. In fact, my latest episode with Harriet Gruen is another case in point. Harriet came out with a quote saying that she felt like she went from 0 to 100 when she set off on her journey to ride from Europe to Central Asia. And look at her now. My goodness, she's setting fastest known time records and has turned herself into an ultra cyclist. So adventure awaits us all. You just need to have the idea and then force yourself to take that first step. Now, listeners, Tom did mention that he does have a book about this journey, and I have provided links in the show notes from where you can purchase it if you are so inclined. And thank you so much, Tom. Listeners, recently I put a poll out on Instagram, and it was all about how we plan our journeys and what we use to plan our journeys, and the idea of using a paper map to plan out our journey. And that poll overwhelmingly came out with the fact that we're all map lovers. Many people either take a paper map with them or plan out their journey and look at maps with the ideas of the possibilities that can come and the adventures that can come from going from this place to that place. And I guess tying it back into this episode, from going here to the spaces in between. This poll was all sparked by my interview with Heinz Stucker. I was surrounded by all of his maps when I went to interview him in person in northern Germany, and Heinz is very much a storyteller, but also each map tells a story, and he only travelled with paper maps. So what about you? Are you a paper map lover, a digital person? Do you like taking Google Adventures, sticking to Komoot? let me know on Instagram. My account there is @SeekTravelRide. And if you follow us along there, you can also see a lot of the visuals behind the journeys that I am sharing each and every week. Listeners, this is my chance to give a shout out to you, my superfans, who have gone the extra mile and shouted me some virtual coffees. These coffees come in each week and they go towards the running cost of keeping this podcast alive, and I am very appreciative of everyone who has bought me coffees so far. This week I want to give a shout out to Lisa Morrison. Lisa, you have said, I just love your podcasts and the way you're making a cycling and cycle touring community out of it. It's truly inspiring and wonderful guests and stories. I love it. Cheers, Lisa. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for the virtual coffees, and you are definitely a part of our thriving community. It's probably been the best thing about starting this podcast is the community that has sprung up all around it. Guests sharing their stories, people taking inspiration from those and taking adventures to then become the people who are inspiring others to take adventures. It's sort of like this continuous circle, this rolling stone that's gathering speed and momentum. We may be the 0.1% of people in the world who adventure in this way, but each person in this community is inspiring others to do so, and I love it. Thank you so much, Lisa Morrison. And listeners, if you would like to be like Lisa and support the show, simply head to buymeacoffee.com/seektravelride. Buy me some virtual coffees and let me know what is it that you are loving about the podcast and where is your next bike adventure going to take you. And until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.